Hello and welcome to the WellnessPlus podcast. I'm joined today by Dr. Nisha Khanna. She's an integrative practitioner focusing on functional medicine and Ayurvedic medicine. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you for having me.
So before we started, you had mentioned that as an integrative practitioner, bringing Ayurvedic medicine and functional medicine together, it's East meets West, old meets new. I love that as a philosophy. Can you talk a little bit more about that and what your practice looks like?
Yeah, so it's really interesting because I first studied internal medicine and then sought answers beyond what was conventionally taught. There were a lot of conditions that were idiopathic, which means we don't know. And I really wanted to seek a little deeper for answers. And I found myself drawn to Ayurveda because being in an Indian family, it was sort of the medicine that got passed down through the generations. And I first saw my first Ayurvedic practitioner was maybe cut.
Yeah.
Sorry. So I first had an experience with an Ayurvedic practitioner at age 15, and I continued to follow up after that. And I found myself in medical school, in residency, learning one thing and enjoying learning about the human body, but also realizing that there was all this ancient wisdom that I was drawing from for my own healing and for my own kind of preventative medicine. And it was sort of my dream to learn more about it. And after completing medical school residency, working for 5 years, that's when I had the opportunity to go study Ayurveda in depth. Mm-hmm. And I took 2 years off of just working to go back and study. And I studied with Dr. Ladd in New Mexico. And it was such an amazing time in my life. I felt like everything kind of aligned for me to be there. And I felt like the sense that when you feel like your soul's purpose is being realized, I had that passion sort of coming up within me that I hadn't really felt with traditional medicine. And so having studied Ayurveda for a couple of years and really being immersed in it, it was great to then come back to Austin, where I lived in Austin for college, come back to Austin and join a functional medicine practice. Functional medicine wasn't something that I was aware of in my training up until moving back here. And I think it was just sort of coming on the forefront at that time. And what was so amazing is that what I was learning in functional medicine through the training and the experience of working with patients mirrored Ayurveda in that essentially in functional medicine and in Ayurveda, it takes it back to the gut, back to digestion for optimal healing, prevention of disease, regulation of the immune system, of mood. And so it was really amazing because in Ayurveda, we talk about the concept of if you have a strong Agni, which is digestive fire metabolism, then it prevents all disease. And then functional medicine was paralleling this concept with that the gut is the root of all evils. And so when I came back, I was paralleling concepts from my training in Ayurveda and what I was learning through all the research that's been done in functional medicine. And it was a really brilliant time of seeing the ancient wisdom sort of be validated through research and through studies. And so that's sort of my passion, is how do I merge the two and create treatment plans that are really individualized for a patient. What I learned through my functional experience is that people often end up with a lot of testing and a lot of supplements. And I feel like my approach is more tailored to the person. So it's not about it's not about one size fits all. It's about let's get your digestion really strong, and maybe we need to do a functional cleanse followed by an Ayurvedic cleanse for that purpose. And then let's minimize the supplements that you need to take so that you're just not on this like 20 supplement list for the rest of your life, you know, like I find that sometimes that can be like a money-making scheme, like someone's on supplements. And I don't think people come to it saying like, oh, I'm just going to make a bunch of money and order a bunch of tests and, have my own brand for supplements. I think they really think they're helping someone, but in Ayurveda, there's the concept that we can only assimilate that which we can digest. And so if your digestion is weak, then you could be taking 20 supplements, eating the best organic food, and it's still turned to toxicity. So what I try to do in my practice is use the wisdom from both fields, because they're both very valid and they both have a similar core philosophy, and really tailor treatment to the person, so that I'm not just working on the physical plane, but also working on the mind, body, emotional component, and affecting that really deep healing, which I feel like Ayurveda offers, because it's such a spiritual science and wisdom and not just about the physical. And so drawing from those two fields, as well as some additional training that I've had, I get really excited about that full body, mind, spirit healing complex that I get to address in my treatment plans.
Wow. That is just so fascinating too, that as you're looking through the functional medicine and learning all of these different pieces, it's actually, like you said, just kind of validating all of these concepts that it sounds like you really grew up with that understanding of an Ayurvedic approach.
Well, in Indian cooking in general is Ayurvedic. And I feel like, if you go to an Indian restaurant, that's not indicative of what an Indian plate is like. There's a lot of heavy cream and oils, and it's not like that if you grow up with Indian food, but like turmeric is, gets a lot of, is very popular these days. It's not about, one single spice, but the spices that are just, traditional Indian food that you would eat, your mother's cooking is Ayurvedic. And they think about the plate in terms of the 6 tastes and how the 6 tastes reflect the 6 phases of digestion. And when you eat a plate that is composed of those 6 tastes, you have a deeper level of satisfaction, but you're also feeding each level of digestion, from stomach to large intestine. And so it's really kind of a beautiful, I guess, gift that I had to experience that growing up.
Right.
And then it was a deeper dive when I went into school.
Right. So it also sounds like it kind of harkens back to that concept of letting food be thy medicine, letting the foods that you're eating really be the first step in how you take care of yourself. Whereas in the West, there's much more of an eating for satisfaction, eating for pleasure. And unfortunately, I think a lot of the food manufacturers have really taken advantage of people's cravings for sweet, cravings for salt, so that the food has become almost an assault to our health rather than a key component of building health right as you're sitting there at the dinner table.
Yeah.
Can you speak a little bit more about that, the Ayurvedic approach to eating? And it really sounds like that is kind of the foundation for good health.
Yeah, I would say diet and lifestyle, and it's very unique to the person. So in sort of our mainstream culture, there's fads that come out like, okay, everything is soy. Okay, everything is like goji berries. Okay, everybody do coconut oil. It's like bullet coffees, there's and then everybody gets on the bandwagon and is excited about something and, oh, this is helping me. But what I really like about Ayurveda is that it's tailored and it gives you instruction and direction as to what is good for you, for your particular unique constitution, and in what time of your life and what season of the year, as well as what conditions are actually showing up for you. So, for example, in Ayurveda, there's 3 constitutions, major constitutions, that could be represented by, say, air, fire, and water. And it's a bit more complex than that, but I'll just simplify it like that. And so someone who has a really fiery constitution can be prone to, say, skin conditions, psoriasis, acne, even inflammatory bowel disease, more autoimmune conditions. And what's interesting is, say someone's coming in to see me for eczema or acne, then I'm going to be working from a dietary perspective to minimize those foods that are aggravating to that constitution. So you wouldn't throw fire on fire. In Ayurveda, there's the concept that opposites balance. And so what I like about Ayurveda is it's so simple. It's just beautiful. Everybody can learn about it and then be empowered for their own health. And they can make conscious decisions like moment to moment when they are choosing what to eat and how much spice to add. So for example, when we are out of balance, we crave things that are going to further that out of balance. But when we're in balance, we crave the things that keep us in balance. So you can't trust your cravings if you're out of balance. So for example, I see a lot of patients who have these kind of just flaring skin conditions and they're eating a bunch of spicy food. So that's the first thing to go. I say, hey, you know spice. Let's cool you down. And you can cool someone down through multiple avenues. There's foods, there's herbs. So cooling substances to eat would be things like coconut, mint, cilantro. There's a lot of there's whole lists of cooling vegetables, cooling fruits, and it goes, looking at the properties of each substance. So, I'll mainly give people direction as to avoid really sour things, avoid really spicy food, actually just eliminate spice for a period of time, except there are a few exceptions that are spices that are actually digestive and cooling, and those would be things like coriander and fennel. And then a little bit of fresh ginger. But it's just nice to have that dietary piece and then add another layer of, say, supplements or herbs that would be cooling on top of that. And then say that person's doing hot yoga, and you say, hey, you don't need any more heat. Just cool yoga, right. In a room temperature room, or go skiing, or, something like that. So really looking at that whole dietary but also lifestyle piece. And usually those fiery types, they're fiery personalities. So they're real driven. They've got their to-do list. Everything has to be just perfect and checked. And so you actually invite them to have a bit more leisure in their day, more relaxation, understand what is the root of this perfectionist mindset. How can we bring the mind into balance too? And what's really beautiful is that as you bring the body into balance, you affect the mind. So as you work on the physical plane to minimize those irritants to that fire quality, then the brain calms down too, and they're less irritable, they're less stressed out, they're less, have to be perfectionist about things. And so it's really lovely, because one of my first newsletters that I ever wrote was, it's not you, it's your pitta. So because sometimes I would notice in school, like, oh my God, I'm really irritated. I'm so critical of others, and I'm critical of myself too. Okay, I can step aside from that and recognize that doesn't have to be me. And so we can sort of start to understand that our personality is being created by what we're eating and how we're living, and it doesn't have to define us. And when you recognize that your personality is something that you can actually choose and you can modify through what you're eating, it's really amazing. Because when those things would happen to me, when I would get more upset or critical, I would be like, oh, okay, my pitta is elevated, so I'm going to, take this cooling aloe vera gel internally, and I'm going to, modify my diet a little bit. And then lo and behold, a few days later, I'm like back to being zen and happy.
Wow. That's incredible. And I was really intrigued when you said that when we're out of balance, we will crave the things that will put us more out of balance. Can you speak a little bit more about that, and maybe how people could, ascertain whether they are in balance or out of balance, and to know whether to trust those cravings or whether to maybe see the cravings as an indication of, what is out of balance for their condition?
Yeah, sure. So it's interesting that brought to mind this Sanskrit sutra, which is basically like a rhythmic phrase that helps you unlock the wisdom from the ancient Vedic scriptures. And so it translates to balanced doshas, sama agni, so balanced digestion, balanced doshas, and it's talking about balance in all the processes of the body. So balanced metabolism, digestion, the doshas or the elements of the body, and balanced bodily processes, including elimination, as well as bliss in the mind, soul, and senses. So in essence, I was like, oh, okay, so it's just telling you that health equals enlightenment. And so, but that's one, you can look at this definition of health and know how close to balance you are. So for example, if you feel energetic and you feel like you don't have any gas or bloating and you have a good appetite and you sleep well and you have you're peaceful, you're happy, you're joyful, you're excited to share whatever it is that you share during the day, then you probably are in balance. But if you're the opposite, so if you're having disturbed sleep, if you're having acne, if you're having irregular menses, if you're having a lot of anxiety, stress, insomnia, then okay, I'm not in balance. I can't trust my craving for popcorn and dry raw vegetables because that's just going to exacerbate the air and space element, which is going to promote more of that. So I'll explain that a little bit more. So when Vata is out of balance, which is the air and space element, then it can lead to racing thoughts, anxiety, insomnia, inability to gain weight. And we've probably all met people that were like, wow, okay, that's typical. Mm-hmm. They look like they could have that imbalance, and maybe that's just the lens that I take. So I can look at different people and sort of assess, okay, I know what your digestion's like. I know what what your sleep is probably like, what emotions you tend to. And so it really is an unlocking once you get this education and once you and this is self-education too, it's something that we can all learn either through a practitioner or through books, and then learn more about ourselves, our tendencies. And so kind of back to your question, it's just, what was your question?
It's okay. The question was just, for someone who's, maybe wondering if their cravings are healthy or if they're out of balance and they need to be more wary of their cravings, how you would know. And I think you answered that.
Okay.
It is interesting in the world of wellness. So many of us have maybe accepted our condition as it is. For example, headaches. I've heard people say that, if you're having more than 1 or 2 headaches a year, that's too many. But I know so many people who maybe have a headache once a week, twice a week, several times a month. So it's just as an example of where we maybe accept a condition as that's just who we are. Or going back to the emotional piece. Oh, I'm just somebody who's high strung. I have a short patience, I'm irritable, etc. But maybe being able to see that those things, like you said, are not really you. They are your symptoms of this imbalance. And so with this knowledge, you can actually help to bring your body back into balance and maybe reduce those headaches or reduce that irritability or tendency towards, aggression or upset.
Yeah. That's exactly true. And so we don't have to have our diagnoses and our tendencies as part of our definition of identity, and so we can through coming back into balance, we can really, it's almost like a rebirth, because you can choose who you are and who you want to be. And when you're not that person, then that something's off, and you just need to take a supplement or change your diet or change your lifestyle, just a little bit tweaking. And so that's the beauty, is that it's almost like a return to self, and it's a return to the balance within yourself that exists in most people from birth. And then, life happens and our parents feed us things, and what I mean? And then we start to think, oh no, I'm just that person who tends to be kind of overweight, or I'm that person who tends to headaches, or, but those are just clothes in a way, and you can put on a new set if you get back to balance. And one of the best ways to do that is to do a reset with something like an Ayurvedic cleanse. And that sort of is the fast track to getting back into balance. And then from there, it's just about maintenance.
Mm-hmm. Can you explain a little bit more of what, I guess, is part of that cleanse or the process of it?
Yeah, sure. And so that's where something I'm really passionate about, which is the blend of functional medicine and Ayurveda comes together, because the Ayurvedic cleanse is essentially lightening the diet, lightening digestion, so that the digestive energy can be used to process undigested food from times past, emotions, toxicity that's lodged within the body. And you do that most of the time over about 7 to 9 days. You're not starving. You're still eating food, mostly cooked lentils and rice and vegetables, essentially a warm, soupy diet. So this is something that someone could do even without the guidance of a practitioner. They could still get some benefit. It is best to do it with kind of the other therapies too. However, even if someone just wanted to do a quick reset, they could take 3 days of just having warm, cooked, soupy food, and they would notice an improvement in their digestion, in their, maybe even have some detox weight loss. So it's really nice to have that tool. For example, with myself, if I ate heavy the night before or the day before, or just maybe traveling or something like that, then I'll follow it with, say, 3 days of a really nice modified diet with broth and cooked vegetables and lentils in a khichdi type preparation, which is when you mix rice and lentils and vegetables together with cooked spices, and follow it with that. So, for example, I was just in Sedona for the past weekend, and it was really good, healthy food, but it was still probably a bit more than I would usually eat. And so the past 3 days, I'm kind of detoxing, and I'm following a diet like that. And it's interesting because I have a scale, and I know that there's a lot of controversy around using scales, but for me, it helps me, realize where I am on the toxicity scale. So each day that I've been back, I've lost 1 pound,
Wow.
because detox weight we lose very fast. And so it's nice to have these measures that will let us know when we're out of balance. So the scale could be one. If you know that your usual is around a certain set point, there's no way we can gain 5 pounds in 2 days and actually be weight that is, fat cells and things like that. It's just toxicity weight where we retain water. Wow. And so that is weight that comes off really fast. And so when I'm working with patients as well, sometimes they do like an Ayurvedic cleanse like that, and they'll lose 10 pounds in the first 2 weeks. And it's a safe weight loss because it's really just the toxicity weight coming off. And so every pound, every I'm sorry,
no, it's okay.
Lost it. There's some conversion about. Anyway, never mind. So back to talking about how functional medicine relates to that, is that because the Ayurvedic detox diet is light, easily digestible starches, essentially, lentils and rice and some proteins, sometimes patients can't tolerate that level of starch right off the bat if they have gut dysbiosis, which is an overgrowth of organisms in the gut. And so I'll do a functional type cleanse with some herbal supplements directed to that, start some probiotics, really get their digestion tuned up from a dysbiosis standpoint, and then when they're ready, introduce them to the Ayurvedic cleanse, which then won't aggravate any condition of candida or other issues that might exist because they had the intense dysbiosis before.
Right. Just out of curiosity, among the patients that you see, how common is that gut dysbiosis?
Well, I think it's probably about 95% of people.
Wow.
Yeah, because, if you think about it, our parents didn't know that antibiotics are bad for you. And many people still don't know that. And I also work in telehealth for part of the day, so I have my private practice, but I'm also kind of keeping up with some respect with modern medicine in a clinical setting. And I'm always educating patients about the use of antibiotics and what that can do. And we really only want to use an antibiotic when it's fully indicated, because I feel like, I know they are overprescribed, so a patient comes in and the doctor has 10 minutes with them. And the patient came to the doctor, they hope to receive something other than just do saltwater gargles and take Flonase and use Mucinex. They came for a prescription. Right. So a lot of doctors are, and this is changing as the guidelines are really reflecting what is appropriate practice. But it's about changing that patient who's used to getting a prescription for every cold or allergy symptom. And so what's happening is that every time a patient is exposed, or a person is exposed to an antibiotic, the intestinal bacteria, good as well as bad, get wiped out. And a lot of those good strains are never recovered. And so a lot of those healthy probiotic strains are responsible for preventing autoimmune diseases, preventing weight gain and obesity, and appropriate mood and happiness, wellness, And so every time someone takes an antibiotic, they're losing some of their good bacteria that they can't recover in the future, no matter how many probiotics you take after it. Wow. So if you think about it, most kids have been exposed to at least, 10 antibiotics in their childhood, and then they continue to have yearly sinus infections where they get another antibiotic. And then it's no surprise that, when they're in their 30s and 40s, they start really manifesting a lot of medical conditions, and if not sooner, because it's the overprescription of antibiotics. And so when you ask who has gut dysbiosis, pretty much anybody who's had, a series of antibiotics, especially as a child, when you have a very kind of tender immune system, you're just building it. Right. And so that, as well as oral contraceptive use. So for any time for greater than 3 years, that will affect the microbiome. Basically, glyphosate affects your microbiome. So that's Roundup, which is on non-organic crops. But, in America, they spray it everywhere. So a lot of farms are getting contaminated, no matter whether it's wheat or not. So heavy metals affect the microbiome. So we're exposed to things like fluoride in the water. It's just, it's this constant assault on our intestinal health. And so I'm surprised if someone doesn't have dysbiosis. Wow.
And then, I definitely think that cumulative effect is so important for people to understand, that there's all of these little pieces, but it's probably not any one of those little pieces that's solely responsible when you take all of the pieces together and then consider what the average diet is for most people, which is highly processed. And like you said, even if you are eating, even if you are eating your 7 to 9 servings of vegetables per day, which I think is not really common for people, a lot of times even those vegetables are sprayed with pesticides and glyphosate, etc. So definitely just recognizing that it's not this one thing, but all of these different pieces together helps people kind of understand how they ended up in that situation, especially for the people who are mostly healthy. They're trying to eat right, they're trying to be active, and that is really kind of the most difficult situation, or for people who feel like they've been trying to do really well, and then somehow they've ended up with, basically dysfunction of digestion or whatever different symptom that manifests for them. So you kind of vaguely mentioned the functional cleanse that helps to restore the gut biome. Can you go a little bit more into detail with that? And you had mentioned that taking probiotics alone won't necessarily correct the gut dysbiosis.
Yeah, so There's many variations out there, but what I typically do is guide patients through about a month of cleanse where they're eating a paleo type diet. So they're really trying to starve out any candida, parasites, things that feed off of sugars and a high carbohydrate diet. So the diet is pretty much that piece, and then I'll add in an herbal supplement that is pretty broad spectrum for things with oregano oil and grapefruit seed extract that cover a large population of different organisms to bring those levels down, and then add in a probiotic and maybe follow it with some glutamine to rebuild the gut. And a lot of patients do really well with that. They'll notice increases in energy, memory, better sleep, better, things that they weren't even expecting. I've had patients that were, say, coming in for vaginal yeast infections that were very frequent, then do a cleanse such as this and then be like, and my skin looks amazing,
Right.
And I've never had clear skin like this. And so it's just all these side benefits that also happen as we look to the gut, because we know that it's in the center of our body, so it's playing a central role in our health, and it's something that I think is now getting a lot of acknowledgement, but for a large portion of time there, people were really just looking at, oh, well, I have this thing here, now I need to fix this, versus let me look at the whole system, and then we'll fix things that we didn't even know were a problem.
Right. Those things that people had just accepted, like, oh, I don't have clear skin, or I don't sleep well. I just, I've had people come to me and say, oh, yeah, I only sleep 3 or 4 hours a night. And it's like, well, that doesn't mean that it's healthy for you to only sleep 3 or 4 hours a night. And let's talk about maybe why, your body is not able to have that, appropriate sleep.
And that level of stress affects the microbiome too, So having these infections in the gut stresses the adrenals, and also there's this kind of gut-brain connection, which what I find really interesting is that we might think that we just have a sweet tooth, or we crave sweets, or we crave have cravings for fried fatty food, but it's peeling the layers back so that you recognize that your identity is actually quite separate from these things. You don't have to be that person that craves sweet things. Actually, there's a lot of research that shows that it's the overgrown, for example, yeast that are releasing neuropeptides and that are signaling to the brain to eat sugar. And so as you clear up the gut, then the cravings shift too, and like, oh my God, it's been weeks and I haven't wanted anything sweet, And so that's the really kind of powerful piece for me too, is that it's empowering to not be governed by cravings. When you get into balance, you're not pulled in different directions. And then you can really get to that centered place within yourself and be like, okay, what's good for me? What's good for my body today? And you're not being like, oh my God, I just need some sugar to, function for the rest of the day. Or if I don't get something sweet tonight, then I'm, not going to be happy,
Right. And it is interesting how our emotional happiness and a lot of times our emotional coping comes back to food. And we have that concept of comfort foods, which unfortunately are really not the most healthful foods for us. So it's interesting that when we are craving comfort, there's that disconnect in, I guess, the gut or the gut-brain connection that has us crave foods that are really only going to worsen the situation rather than resolve it. And that kind of is maybe just reaffirming the statement that you made earlier about how when we're out of balance, our body will be craving the things that will only put us more out of balance.
And I mean, it's also looking at things in terms of energy. So, for example, the sweet taste represents the energy of love. And so where in our life where are we not feeling fed by love? And so, I had one of my teachers in Ayurvedic school mentioned, well, how about when you have a sugar craving, why don't you substitute it with reading a beautiful poem or looking at a sunset or going for a walk? Something that's going to nourish your spirit in other ways. And a lot of times when someone does have a craving for something, or myself, all you need to do is do something else that brings you enjoyment, and usually that craving goes away. It's like you kind of get up, get into your energy, activate your body, move those muscles, like do something that is going to shift the focus so that it's not always about I'm only fed through the mouth, you know?
Right. Can you talk a little bit more about the different flavors and what they signify? That's really fascinating.
Well, let's see. I don't know if I have it all kind of mapped out, but I know, so there's, in Ayurveda, there's different tastes, and the 6 different tastes are sweet, salty, sour, bitter, astringent. Did I get them all? Yeah, sweet, sour, salty, bitter, astringent, pungent. Okay. The different tastes are composed of different elements that make them up. And you can look at the elemental makeup of a food to determine if it's going to be supporting you or pushing you further out of balance. So along the same example of flared acne or eczema, we're saying it's the fire element, which is out of balance. So you're going to want to stay away from really pungent, spicy food. So pungent, again, has the fire element in it. And so you can look at the elements that compose a food. So for example, bitter and astringent foods are both vata aggravating because they have a lot of cold quality. They're composed of space, of air, and so when someone's really aggravated, for example, having insomnia, you would avoid those bitter astringent foods. And so an example of something astringent would be like the puckering that you get in your mouth when you have an unripe banana, or pomegranates can also be astringent. So it's anything that's going to suck up water. And so when you think of vata, or the air and space element, it's already dry. So that could show up as constipation for some people. And actually that's probably one of the first ways it shows up. And so you'd want to avoid things that have that bitter astringent quality because they're just going to suck up more of that water.
Interesting. And how would you recommend that, as someone, I know that there are, resources and stuff where you can take quizzes to figure out, where you fall and which is your, dominant dosha. Is there a recommendation that you would give for somebody if they were wanting to go and try to maybe get to the root of their own system or their own condition? Yeah,
there are a lot of different questionnaires out there. I've used the one with Banyan Botanicals, and that's just banyanbotanicals.com. It's a good place to start, and the way I would suggest taking it is taking it twice. So take it once for what's going on with you currently, and then once for what was true for you for most of your childhood and young adulthood, because in Ayurveda, there's a concept of Vikruti and Prakriti. So Prakriti is your innate constitution, and Vikruti is the current imbalance. And so the Vikruti can, say, show up vata aggravation or pitta aggravation, but you could actually be a kapha constitution. And so if that's the case, then you want to do the dietary and lifestyle recommendations to manage the current imbalance, but you don't want to forget that your baseline constitution is actually something else. And so I'll give you an example of that. So for example, if someone is a kapha or someone's a vata constitution, but they have a kapha imbalance, so maybe that's showing up as hypothyroidism. And so for that type of doshic imbalance, what you would do is try to pacify both of them. And so usually the food spectrum is the exact opposite. So one is sweet, eats sweet fruits, and the other one's saying eat astringent fruits. So then you're just like confused, right? So what I would suggest, if that's the case, is that you would follow the dietary guidelines of the kapha constitution, but they maybe prepare them in a vata way. So, for example, maybe you would have unripe bananas, but you would cook them, and you would serve them, with some spices, because spices are good for both. So, prepared in a vata way means moistened and warm, versus a cold food. So you can do things to mitigate both imbalances without throwing one completely out of the window, and then you're left with another imbalance.
Right.
But what I would say is it's probably most important to direct your attention to the current imbalance to bring it back, and then you can start focusing on the baseline constitution.
Wow. And then, to ask you again, among the patients that you see, is there a common trend of, certain ailments and certain imbalances that you see commonly?
Yeah, I think it's really interesting. I feel like a lot of practitioners maybe attract patients that are either reflect something they've overcome or gone through themselves and then overcome, or something that they're currently working on. So I will see certain waves of patients come through based on things that I've sort of overcome myself. But I would say where I feel the most resonance in terms of feeling really confident about what the management strategies are would be optimal weight, really good sleep, and then really good digestion and balancing sex hormones. So those are sort of the areas that I advertise that I feel really good about treating. And so I think that's what comes to me, is because if you specify, well, I do this really well, then that's what, people are going to be, oh, okay, I'll come see you for that. So I really light up with hormone balancing. I think it's fascinating, and I really enjoy sort of the functional bioidentical approach to balancing both sex hormones for women going through perimenopause, menopause, as well as working with the thyroid to get that balance really good of both the T4, T3 combination.
Mm-hmm. And then do you have any, hunch or gut feeling, so to speak, in terms of, underlying factors, that are maybe either causing those things for people, or, I know you talked a lot about the gut dysbiosis and that kind of at the root of their body not being able to absorb the nutrients that they need and not being able to get rid of the things that the body doesn't need.
Yeah.
Is there anything else like that you see commonly?
Yeah, well, it's interesting because the dysbiosis usually is the root cause of the other hormonal imbalances. So what my approach is to work on that root cause level, and then also work on the other layers that sort of manifest out from that. So for example, if someone has dysbiosis, then they often will have, or they can have, bacteria that are supposed to allow the estrogen to move through the liver and get detoxified and stay deconjugated and allow it to go back into the stool for elimination, or go into the stool for elimination. However, when there is an overgrowth, there's bacteria in the gut that unconjugate the estrogen and allow it, or they modify the estrogen so that you actually resorb it back into your body. And then you end up with more estrogen than you should have because the elimination process has been thwarted. And so then you end up with estrogen dominant conditions, which can show up as multiple things. So heavy periods, PMS, menorrhagia, ovarian cysts, and so it's interesting because that you can't just treat the hormones. They might just need progesterone to balance out the estrogen, and I could definitely prescribe that, but I'm not going to do that without working on the gut, which is the root cause. And so the same thing with the thyroid. And so it's the dysbiosis that's driving the estrogen dominance, which can then affect the thyroid as well. And so then the other piece to the thyroid is when the gut is stressed, the body senses that as internal stress. So they could be yogis on a mountaintop and not have any external stress, but they're going to experience the internal stress of inflammation of the body, the immune system acting up, trying to fight these overgrown organisms. And then that's going to affect the adrenals. And so the adrenals will experience that as stress, which will then lead to thyroid imbalances because the adrenals and thyroid talk to each other.
Very interesting. in addition to, you had kind of talked about the Ayurvedic cleanse, taking soups. Can you talk a little bit more about, I guess, maybe soup in general? Because I've heard from different sources things like having a warm bowl of soup before a meal is a really effective way to stimulate digestion. So I think it's really fascinating that then your approach to cleansing, or the Ayurvedic approach to cleansing, is really largely using those kind of warm soups as a tool. So I just think that's really interesting. And I love soup. So.
Oh, good. And it's winter now. So, well, the way I explain it to patients that I think it makes a lot of sense is that anytime you eat something, it's food on your plate, but your body has to take that through the process of your mouth, going into your stomach and pretty much make a smoothie out of it, a warm smoothie or a soup, because that's the liquid is going to be what goes through the rest of the intestines. It's going to go through your small intestine, and so that's where the aspect of chewing your food so that it becomes a liquid comes into play, because you want to relieve whatever stress on your body possible by making its job easier. So in a way, pre-digesting your food for it. And then it will keep your energy stores available for either more energy for your day or more energy to digest other waste that may have accumulated from the day before or months before. And so, in general, warm liquids and warm food is better, easier to digest for that purpose, because your body doesn't have to use as much effort to do it.
Interesting. And so, I've heard the recommendation to not drink, iced water, cold water, because your body actually has to warm the liquid up in order for it to pass through digestion. Is that kind of a similar concept?
Yeah, and also cold liquids cause vasoconstriction, so that's constricting of the blood vessels. And when you think about digestion, you're actually trying to bring blood flow to the area so that you can absorb the nutrients. And so when you cool things down, you're pretty much shutting off the vasculature to that area, and so your absorption won't be as well either.
Okay, so do you recommend that people, just try to avoid those cold liquids?
Oh, yeah. I mean, there are very rare circumstances where I think a cold liquid is indicated, especially iced. And so we'll joke with people that are kind of in my friend circle or, thinking along the same Ayurvedic lines, like, you go to sit at a restaurant and they bring you like ice waters all around. Like, I look at that as like, oh my God, like, that's the worst thing I could have with my meal, because it's pretty much like everything you eat, you're going to just shut it down. And so it's really not indicated. I'll maybe have something iced when it's really hot in Texas in the summer, but it won't be anywhere near a meal. Okay. So for example, and I actually don't use ice at all, but I'll have something from the fridge. So usually everything I drink is room temperature or hot. And it's interesting because I feel like someone who's used to drinking ice water, they're like, oh, that's gross, I'll never have that. But the more you do it, you feel so good that you get used to it, and then all you want is hot water or room temperature water. And when you have something cold, it feels like a shock to your system.
Right. Interesting. So that's a great recommendation. Just avoiding iced liquids, especially before or right after mealtime, I guess.
Yeah, I would say at least a couple hours in each direction.
Interesting. And you're right. We live in Texas where it gets very warm. So cold smoothies, cold juices, of course, ice water is the typical thing that you're going to receive. Speaking to things like smoothies and juices, are those still healthy things even though they're typically cold?
Well, so there's a lot of controversy, and I don't usually make a lot of blanket statements for patients, because for somebody, something might be toxic based on what they're going through, and the other person, they can tolerate it and they feel good and it's okay. It's still not the recommendation, but if it's something that someone is not experiencing a negative effect with, and they're overall doing well, then I will sort of tease out when I first meet someone, like, which are the things that you really don't want to give up? Because part of it is building rapport, but part of it is also, wanting someone to still feel like their life has meaning and they're satisfied. And we can really attach to certain foods. Like, for example, some people are really attached to their morning coffee. And so if they're willing to do, and I can see like, okay, well, that's not ideal. But if they're willing to make some other changes that are going to have a significant benefit, then maybe I'll say, okay, we'll switch to maybe green tea a couple days and have coffee on the weekends or something like that as a treat versus your daily dose of coffee. So, so it really is kind of dependent. So back to smoothies then, one of the biggest problems I see with smoothies is that people throw so much in there. And so in Ayurveda, there is the concept of food combining, which I tend to follow and promote. Again, there's a whole spectrum of how strict are you on this. Some people say, okay, if you're putting it all in a blender, you're helping with the digestion process, then they're all in there getting along anyway, it's okay. And other people say you don't mix fruit with spinach or other greens, for example. You keep your fruit separate by an hour. And so fruit and nuts go well okay together because they're sort of all in the fruit nut family. So, for example, with a lot of people being dairy-free these days, it isn't as much of an issue because then they'll have their almond milk with their fruit smoothie, or they'll get an almond yogurt and put fruit on it, and it's okay. But you wouldn't really recommend doing that with dairy because of the different digestion times for each substance. So the fruit digests really fast. It's actually considered pre-digested or pre-cooked by the sun, and the yogurt, for example, is really heavy. It's a heavy protein. It's going to stay in the stomach longer. And then the fruit and the protein would sort of stay together because you ate them at the same time, and one would ferment and lead to more kind of fermentation acidity and then maybe more dysbiosis.
Wow. Can you explain a little bit more about the food combining? We see a lot of questions about this, so it's definitely an interesting topic.
Yeah, so one of the easiest ways I explain it is keep your fruit separate. Like, it's really easy to do and to just have fruit as a snack. So, for example, when someone goes to a buffet and there's like steak and then there's watermelon and then there's orange juice, like that's like, if you were to look at your tongue the next day, I'm sure you'd see a pretty thick coating, which is a measure of how much toxicity you have that you can check day to day. And so
just by looking at the tongue.
Yeah, it's really good. It's kind of like I'm sort of obsessed with always looking at my tongue in different lights, So, but yeah, I mean, it's kind of like your feedback from your body that tells you how you're doing. And the other interesting piece is that when you've had a really emotional day, and say you were really emotional while you were eating, then you don't digest very well because of that, again, that gut-brain connection. And so even emotional waste will show up on the tongue. So that's like an interesting thing to sort of follow when you get used to looking at your tongue. You can be like, and then you can use that as a tool. So if you see a really thick coating, then you know that you should probably fast for at least half the day that day, or have your warm cooked soupy foods, or just do broth for a part of the day to give your body time to catch up so that it doesn't keep accumulating.
Interesting. So fruits separately. And then I've heard a recommendation that like you should only eat fruit in the morning. Is that something that you recommend? Or?
I have heard that. It's not a full Ayurvedic concept to do that. I think one of the ideas behind that too is probably because you don't actually need those energy stores of like simple easy to digest carbohydrates late in the day. So it's probably better to have it in the morning. There's a lot of controversy in the functional world. They're like, yeah, you need to start your day with some protein, So I don't think that I'm as strict about having fruit just in the morning. What I usually suggest is having it at least an hour before food or at least 2 hours after food. And then that way it sort of gives it lets the food pass out of the stomach into the small intestine before you introduce something else. But ideally, people should be waiting anywhere from 4 to 6 hours before they eat again. So there's a lot of confusion out there about snacking, is snacking good or not? And in Ayurveda, they actually suggest, and there is functional data to support this too, that it's better to eat at, every 6 hours, because that's all 6 phases of digestion, all 6 tastes, and also it prevents the reflux of organisms from the colon into the small intestine, which then could lead to things like SIBO if you are eating too frequently.
Interesting. Yeah, that is definitely a big topic, especially in the realm of like considering the blood sugar, problems that can happen if people are eating really constantly. Then I've also heard recommendations that to keep your blood sugar stable, then you'd want to eat more frequently. So it's very interesting how much kind of conflicting information that we get about that.
And it really is, again, like constitution and patient dependent. So more of a pitta type of digestion is really fast and quick. And so they actually get really hungry for their next meal at 4 hours. And they've gone through the whole 6 stages of digestion. So it's okay for them to eat at that 4-hour interval versus someone with a more kapha, slower digestion should really wait the 6 hours. And oftentimes I'll only recommend that they have 2 meals a day, kind of at like 10 and 5, and give them a long break. And it's always different depending on if someone's taking insulin and are they diabetic and things like that. So you look at the individual when you're coming up with a plan. But if that's not the case, then usually just 2 meals a day is all they need, and then they get that long fast. And I think that's part of the benefit of intermittent fasting is that you're basically giving your digestion time to rest. It doesn't need to be working all the time. Like, okay, what's coming in now? What's coming in now? It's like, it's good to give it that stability and give it a break.
Interesting.
So lastly, about food combining, the other major point is to try to not mix proteins. So for example, the protein from dairy with legume protein or meat protein. So sometimes when you'll go to, say, like a Mexican restaurant, you'll have like beans with your chicken enchilada and then have sour cream, or, those are 3 different types of proteins all on one plate. And so in Ayurveda, they say get your protein from one source in each meal. So either you just have beans, or you just have chicken, or you just have cheese,
Okay. But then, so taking the example of the soup that you mentioned with like rice, lentils, and vegetables.
That's just one protein.
So, because lentils are your main source, even though you have some other components that contain some protein in the vegetables and stuff.
Yeah, it's more like the most protein-rich source. Okay. So, like legumes. And nuts would be okay, even though they have some protein, but it's more like legumes, animal protein, or dairy protein. You don't want to mix all those together.
Interesting. Man, I can only think of about 500 different meals that do exactly that.
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit more? You had mentioned earlier that a meal that contains the 6 different tastes will be the most satisfying to the body. Can you talk a little bit more about maybe like examples?
Yeah. So the dish that comes to mind is this cauliflower dish I made, and it I can't even describe how satisfying it was, because I was consciously thinking of, okay, I'm going to put all 6 tastes in this. So the cauliflower has some astringency, and then I tossed it with some ginger, and that gave it the pungency. And there was also some mustard seeds, which also have some pungent quality. And then I added a squeeze of lime juice for sour, and then I think I added some shredded coconut for sweet, and served it either probably with some rice or I don't remember. Oh, there were some sweet potatoes in there. And so that was the sweet taste. And so we had, and then I also used some other spices like turmeric, which has some bitterness. And turmeric actually has a lot of the a lot of the taste spectrum. Even ginger has a lot of the taste spectrum. But in essence, sort of consciously creating a meal. And I also know of some Ayurvedic chefs that, create 6 taste bowls, so like a Buddha bowl that is consciously thinking about, okay, I'm going to represent each taste. And that way you end up getting the colors of the rainbow, variety, but also the 6 tastes.
Very interesting. So is there anything else that you want to share as kind of a closing thought, or? Because we've covered a lot.
Yeah. Well, just that, I think it's really important to be aware of what's right for your body, for your constitution, to really try to get back into balance so that you can then begin to trust yourself again, and to really be conscious, with your choices, because we have so much power to change the things that are, thinking about life is happening to us. It's not. We can actually, be in charge. And so it's a very empowering health perspective that you're not stuck with something. There are certain things in Ayurveda where it may have the imbalance has gone on for so long, and it's actually created structural shifts or damage that then it's very difficult to reverse it. So something like osteoarthritis or cancer may be an example of that. But in many cases, before it's lodged into the structural system, there is the option to, or the possibility to really reverse it. And so it's very liberating and it's very empowering. And so I encourage everybody to seek out that knowledge so that they can make those conscious decisions for themselves.
Wonderful. I want to thank you so much for taking the time to join us on the program today. And I definitely look forward to having you back to maybe delve a little deeper into some of these other topics.
Okay, great. Thank you so much.
I also want to thank all of you for tuning into the podcast today. You can learn more about Dr. Khanna by visiting NishaKhannaMD.com. And if you'd like to view the full 1-hour interview video version of this podcast, along with hundreds of other videos to help you improve your health and wellness, you can join us over on WellnessPlus.tv. Thank you again for tuning in, and I hope you'll join us again soon. To keep up with our YouTube content, make sure that you've subscribed and clicked that notification bell. If you want to hear the full version of this podcast, along with new episodes every Tuesday and Thursday, you can find the Wellness Plus podcast on your favorite podcast apps, including Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and more. To see the full video version of this episode and to help keep this information free, you can sign up for WellnessPlus.tv or become a Patreon supporter at patreon.com/Psychetruth. We've included all the links you need down in the video description.
We at Wellness Plus specialize in all things health and wellness, ranging from yoga and fitness to massage and ASMR. Whether you are looking to target specific areas of tension or want to enhance your general self-care routine, we provide the tools you need to feel better, look better, and live better. We have courses for every level, whether you're just starting out or you're a seasoned pro. Our courses provide a wide range in difficulty to accommodate your evolving flow.
Welcome back to Yoga with Jess. We are going to break down some really essential postures.
We are going to rock out with some of the most essential ab exercises that you need to have the abs that you've always dreamed of.
I've blended techniques to help you connect with students, and you can be a rock star teacher.
Wellness Plus is available on your phone, tablet, or TV. Join Wellness Plus today and get your first 7 days free.